Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Logtechlive. I'm Eric Johnson, your host as always. I am, when I'm not hosting this show, I'm the senior technology editor at the Journal of Commerce. But my favorite thing to do is meet up with all of you on the first and third Fridays of every month, 10 a.m. Eastern, to talk about my favorite subject, logistics technology. For those of you who are regulars, thank you so much for being back with us today. Really only do this because of your support. If this is your first episode, you've caught a really good one. This is going to be a great discussion that I'm having today with my guest, and really glad you could join us today. Basically, we go 45 minutes. I go through a few stories that I think are really exciting and interesting to follow, and then I have my guest on. We'll be talking about a lot of interesting things today related to the topic of freight procurement, a little bit of automation, a little bit of venture capital versus bootstrapping discussion. So stay tuned. Before I get to that, I just wanted to highlight a couple things that are upcoming events that I'm going to be involved in that would be great to see you at. First of all, our registration for the Journal of Commerce's Inland Distribution Conference is open and live. We're going to be coming out with an agenda or a more formalized agenda very soon. This is our event where we talk about everything surface transportation related in North America. LTL trucking, LTL truckload, drayage, intermodal, rail, all that good stuff, transloading. We have my colleagues, Ari Ash and Bill Cassidy. They are the best journalists in the space covering those areas. And so they're going to be leading a bunch of really interesting discussions. I will be managing a few sessions related to what else, tech in that part of the world. So would be delighted if you could join us in Chicago. That's September 25th through 27th. So registration is open. Sorry, I don't know if my signal popped up there for a second. Hit me up if you want a discount code. Right now, there's early bird pricing. So go and take advantage of that while it lasts. Folks having some technical difficulties. Ironic for a technology program. Just bad Wi-Fi here where I'm at in DC. Anyway, join me for the Ports and Harbors World Ports Conference in Abu Dhabi in fall. I'm also going to be leading a whole bunch of technology sessions at that event. So it would be great to see all of you who are involved on the technology side of ports and terminal operations. So one more thing I wanted to do before I get into news of the week. As you've heard me say a bunch of times, Blended Pledge. This is a fantastic initiative by Sarah Barnes-Humphrey and the Let's Talk Supply Chain team, all about getting diverse voices at industry conferences and industry events so that the makeup of those events and the makeup of panels and speakers looks a little bit more like the real world and not like just a bunch of people who look like me on stage. So support the Blended Pledge. There's a link in the comments. You can give $5, you can give $1,000. What I would love is for some company to own this initiative and really put their name behind it and really get it where it needs to go, which is to support people who don't have the budget to travel to events so that they're able to learn and be present and sort of represent our industry. So with no further ado, let's get to news of the week really quick. So interestingly, I'm going to share 3 stories, and all of them came out yesterday. Yesterday was like one of the newsiest days I can remember in a really long time. Biggest news was Flexport buying Shopify's logistics business, which essentially, Shopify was not doing international ocean and air freight. They were doing final mile fulfillment, warehousing and distribution kind of fulfillment side of things based on an acquisition. Well, based on some of internal development they've done but also on an acquisition they just made last year of Deliver. That's Deliver with 2 R's. They spent $2 billion on Deliver in June of last year. And less than a year later, they essentially spun that off and sold it to Flexport. I'm looking at this. I mean, there's lots of different angles. I'm looking at this less on the Shopify side of things and more on what does this mean for Flexport. I wrote about it yesterday. It's an interesting kind of addition to their core forwarding business. One of the things that Dave Clark, their CEO, told me is alongside their ability to spin off kind of customs as a separate thing, which, you know, forwarders do that too. I don't think it's anything all that revolutionary, but this gives them another sort of pillar to offer what they say is not just small merchants that might be using kind of Shopify in a normal basis to you know, for final mile and fulfillment services, but also what I'm more interested in is targeting the big type of shippers that they are targeting on the forwarding side and offering them like a connected final mile sort of service. So lots of stuff to kind of go into. Everyone has an opinion on this. Go on LinkedIn, you'll find a million different opinions on this from every angle. So I encourage you to kind of dive deeper into this because it's pretty interesting and pretty consequential. Next story from yesterday came out this week that I just wrote about it yesterday. Chris Kirkner, who is probably everyone at this point in this world knows, was ex-CEO of Slink, co-founder, decided to allegedly take a bunch of the money that was invested into the company by VC investors and channel that into his private account so he could live a fairly lavish lifestyle. I'm not going to rehash all that. We've talked about this before on the show. Essentially yesterday, a grand jury agreed with U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, and the DOJ in the U.S. that he should stand trial. So he's been indicted. Next step is now this goes to trial. Some of the counts, you know, the prison sentences associated with some of these activities are not small. So it will be interesting to see where it goes from here. But this is moving forward. And I think for those of the people that were impacted by this, employees, investors primarily, you know, they're obviously very keen on to see this come to a resolution. So that's progressing. We'll be following that as it goes to the next stage. And then the last story that I wrote about yesterday, also interesting in and of itself, is Project 44 and Nexiot are announced a partnership. Why does this matter? Well, if you recall, Nexiot, which I talked about last year, is one of the companies that's helping equip Hapag-Lloyd, the container line, with sensors to affix to every single one of their dry boxes. The other one is Orbcom, the other vendor. So Nexiot, you know, is in the midst of rolling all of that installation for Hapag-Lloyd's dry box fleet out. In the meantime, they've connected with Project 44, who, you know, if you think about it, Project 44 can't possibly generate all of the data that they need to build what they want to build, which is this end-to-end platform that's literally connected to every asset, every moving vehicle in the world, right? It's just impossible. Even with all the money that they've raised, that's just impossible. So they've been extremely partner friendly. I'm not at all surprised to see partnerships like this get created. P44 has had an existing relationship with Tive, another sort of hardware IoT type provider. But this is the first one that I've seen connecting a major visibility platform with one of the hardware vendors, specifically around intermodal containers. So very interesting. I'll be watching. I think one of the things to watch on the hardware side is which container lines beyond Hapag-Lloyd and O&E, which did a deal with Sony earlier this year, are going to commit to equipping their entire dry box fleets as well. So we'll be watching that. Okay, enough with what happened in the past week, or yesterday actually. It's time to bring my guest on. Pieter Kinds is CEO of Freightender, a freight procurement platform. Pieter, I've known him for a few years. He's super active on LinkedIn, and also really interesting company and interesting background. Pieter, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Eric. It's really my pleasure. Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, so let's start from the beginning. Can you give us a little bit about your background specifically, and then what is Freightender? How to get started? Who do you serve? Who are your customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started in logistics technology in 2003 when I co-founded a freight order provider, ControlPay, and I was in that space for about 17 years. And at some point, we saw the need to create a platform for logistics procurement to manage tenders better with specific rate background. And we created Freightender, and then we basically made it a spin-off of ControlPay, and it was given to me and said, okay, make something out of this piece of software, basically. So I brought it to the market, and I'm building it now for 7 years, and we do that completely without any venture capital, so completely privately owned. And we focus at all modes of transportation to make running tenders easier and very efficient.
What was uh, what was the background before Control Pay? How did you get into the industry?
So that was basically my dad, who was in the industry for a very long time. So my dad actually was in forwarding all his life, and at some point he set up a freight exchange in the 80s, just before internet was even there. And
Yep.
then he sold that business, and then he was approached by someone who said, "Well, can you be a part of freight payment, which is really big in the US, but which is non-existent in Europe?"
Yep.
So we got into the venture, and he said, "Well, I'm not going to be part of this for full time. I want to enjoy my retirement, let's say. But can you join this?" And I had some software experience in different startups, so I joined, and all we had at the time was basically three people and a PowerPoint presentation, and that started from there. And eventually, we got out with um, it was at the time 250 people when it was sold. So, but it was a long journey of 17 years.
Yep. Very interesting. So you were born into the industry. I think your background, or I think some of the transition from the payment space to where you are now, procurement, is really interesting because I've covered the freight payment space in the U.S., a little bit in Europe over the years, and I always felt like the missing piece was connecting the actual invoice data, the audited and correctly paid invoice data, into future procurement cycles, right? I don't think companies as a whole are really strong at that yet, even today. So to make that move, super interesting. I'm sure you saw that same sort of opportunity, right?
Yes, because there is often it's basically the missing link. So when you get rates in a freight audit environment, you need to make sure that they are correct. But you can only rely on what you get from those companies, and those companies run a tender or they don't. And the way the tender is really often very different. So the quality of the rates are also different. So you need often to go back to the carriers and get new information and so on and clarifications. And basically, when you do freight audit or when you have a freight procurement platform, you're basically talking to the same people. So it makes a lot of sense in that way to expand and offer more services and make the business more sticky, basically.
Yep. Yep. Well, okay. So as anyone who's been to an event, virtual or in person, has done, I generally always have a session, if not multiple sessions, on freight procurement. I always say it's like the area I find, if not the most interesting, among the most interesting things that I cover. I do feel like over the past few years, the topic of technology to enable freight procurement has really, the significance of it has risen. Why do you think your world is having sort of a moment right now?
I would say that is because, first of all, it's digitization in general. So people are looking
Yep.
more for tools. You have the switch in generation,
Yep.
where the younger generation that now takes more decisions in logistics. They want to use more technology. At the same time, there's also a lack of people, often of resources in logistics, which drives the outside help of either consultants or tools or platforms. So people are naturally looking for this to do things smarter and more effective. But of course, COVID also has contributed to this, because people were looking for tools. I mean,
Yeah.
if you have somebody running Excel files as the basis for a tender, and he sits at home, he's remote, you cannot get to him, and he's not in the office, and you don't see him or her, then there's no way you can get a good view on this. And you want to have a collaborative tool or a platform where you have the visibility to see what's going on, where are my carriers and everything. So in that sense, that has really changed with COVID. That people want to have that visibility and more tools of a collaborative nature, uh, where you can easily see what's going on.
So if I'm hearing you right, part of the what's made technology to enable freight procurement a little bit more of a priority is kind of the decentralized nature of the way people work now. But how does that factor into like how companies strategize around centralizing procurement? And I'm not talking about like buying pens and office supplies alongside freight, but I'm talking about just strictly freight. Like, how are you seeing companies think about how centralized that needs to be if they're operating in, 5 modes and, 4 geos? Like, are they using a tool like yours and giving people autonomy in different regions, or do they want to centralize that function in one place?
It depends a bit on the mode of transportation. So if you look at road, for example, we have customers that use our tool everywhere in the world for road. But
Yep.
obviously in Brazil, it's going to be used in a different way than in Germany, for example,
Yep.
because the market is different. So what you want to do, if you want to spread a certain way of working within your company, certain processes, certain protocols, and compliance, then it's very hard to do that without having any technology. And when you have a tool, you establish already a certain way of working, and then you can say, okay, I mean, you can do whatever you want on the tool in terms of how many carriers you invite and how you what kind of accessorials, cost structures, and rates you have. But we want you to do at least 2 rounds. We want you to have multiple people on it to see what's going on. We want you to do target pricing and so on. And we want you to use a certain standard of reports or scenarios. So we know for sure that you're going through a certain process to
Mm-hmm.
actually optimize the way you get your results. And I think that's a very important thing. Now, if you look at Ocean, for example, that's where it really makes a lot of sense to say we're going to centralize this, because Ocean is always nowadays it's global. So it goes from Asia to the US, and from Asia to Europe, and to Latin America. So um,
And
it makes sense to
there's fewer
centralize that.
providers that you're going to work with than on
Yes,
the truckload side, right? Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from a modal, I'm glad you brought up the modal perspective because I did want to get into that. Can you kind of give some perspective on, are people using, I, I think my understanding is with Freightender, you can procure across modes, but are people tending to use you for 1 or 2 modes? Or are they saying, no, I want a platform where I can procure across all modes? Like, I mean, obviously, I know you would want them to be using it in that way, but what's sort of the typical arrangement?
Um, it always starts somewhere. So when they say we have a road tender coming up, we want to do the road tender. If that works well, then we're going to extend it to another tender that we have later this year, maybe Ocean,
Yeah.
maybe Parcel, and then they may extend it to other business units. They may extend it to other regions. So it always goes gradually, and that's the interesting part, that you start somewhere, and then there's always the ability to grow further with that specific customer. I mean, in many cases, not for everybody, because some companies still need a tool for tendering, but they only do one tender per year, and that's it.
Yep.
But with many companies, there is a need to have a tool in different areas, but it only goes gradually. Yeah.
So so I guess I'm wondering, like, how does it spread within an organization? So someone reaches out to you on the roadside in Europe, and they have, colleagues who are procuring maybe with spreadsheet, old-fashioned negotiation style in ocean or air, or working with the forwarders in air. how does it sort of spread within their organization? Because they may be not accustomed to using a tool like this at all for ocean, right?
Yeah.
Like, so how is it, are you relying on them to sort of interact with each other and say, hey, there's this new way? Or are you kind of like talking to different personas within the organization?
Um, no, we're not. And what we see is very interesting. That's actually an interesting point, Eric, because people get quite enthusiastic about it because they see the result. I mean, it's not hard to implement. So what I did before, freight audit, is change management, very hard to implement. And
Yeah,
this is something that you can easily set up and do and run. You run an event in a month time, so it's fast. So then you have the results, and you can say, for example, well, we got 5% savings, and we got this or that, and we reduced the partner base to only 20 carriers, and then
yeah,
they share this with other people in the organization, and they can say later on, hey, my US colleagues, they heard about I told them about what we did here in Europe, and they are also interested to look into the tool. Can you do a
yeah,
demo for them? And that's really how it goes. Because they do spread it. I mean, bad news travels faster than good news, but good news also travels quite fast.
yeah,
And people are excited about technology, especially when it's not hard to use and when they get the
yeah,
results. And with this, what is interesting, you do get results because obviously using a platform over Excel saves you enormous amount of time. So that's also where the benefit in general of using platforms and technology is.
yeah,
And people get excited about that.
yeah. So one last thing before we kind of change gears a little bit. Automation. I've had a bunch of conversations on this show in just in the last few weeks, months about the impact automation is having on the logistics industry from a variety of angles, like pricing, operations, RPA, chatbots, obviously Chat GPT, that sort of thing. Where is automation coming into play on the procurement technology space? Like, how are you using it? How are your customers using it? Is it, I'm asking you a million questions here, but is it something that's they're conscious of, or is it something that is empowering your system and they're not even really realizing what's happening?
No, they do see it because we take away really a big pain point. So it's really a painkiller what we offer, and that's that you just take the tedious work of handling Excel
Yeah,
out of the equation. So Excel, what does that mean? First of all, it means that you need to set up the file and upload the data and so on, and then send it out, and then you get quotes back. But those quotes back in your email
right.
box in
By email.
Excel.
Yeah,
Yes, and those files have been tinkered with, they have been changed. You need to then cut and paste and put it in one big file, and then you need to follow up with the carriers. And so that's one part of it that you eliminate when the carriers upload directly into the platform. But at the same time, what the system also does, and this is the big calculation part, the comparison part, it does that automatically. So even when you have all the quotations of 50 carriers in your Excel file, then you need to start comparing and you doing different scenarios. Now you need to be above average qualified in Excel to do a good job on that, and it's not
yeah,
going to take you half an hour. So it's going to take you days to do that well. And then when you have updates or when carriers have made mistakes or when carriers sending in their updates, you can do it again. And a system does that basically in seconds. So it's a huge time saver.
so that's an interesting point, and I think, obviously the idea that most software is actually displacing Excel. It's not. It's the competition isn't usually between softwares. It's usually Excel or
Yeah.
status quo versus something new. And I do from time to time get people kind of telling me, Excel is actually amazing. It works really well. But I think you hit upon a good point. Is Excel is amazing and it's super powerful, but it requires someone who really is a super user of it to make it work in modern kind of commerce today. And if that person is out or that person leaves, you have this huge fall down front in terms of capability around it. And I think, what you're working on and a whole bunch of systems that are trying to wean people off Excel is democratizing that. So even your lowest performing employee can be a little bit closer to your highest performing employee on that, on those sorts of
Yeah.
things. So, or performing is not the right word. Maybe technological acumen, right, is probably a better way to put it. So really interesting point. So I could talk to you for another 15 about this, but I did want to get to some of your views on kind of funding and the impact that venture capital has had in the market, because I know you have strong views on this. You haven't been shy about posting on LinkedIn about this. So like, I guess I want to know, before what your views are, I want to know why you feel so strongly about the impact that venture capital has had on the space, before we get into kind of like, taking VC money versus building through bootstrapping. Why is it such an important thing for you?
Because I think probably deep down, I think it's unfair. It's unfair to the industry and to a lot of companies that don't have venture capital. And I also think it's often wasted if you see how the money is being spent, and the amounts that are being funded. There's not really an explanation for it. I mean, you just mentioned Slink, and what you see there is that Kirchner basically took out 60 million or whatever the number is, and he partied with that. And then the new guys come in. Yes, still allegedly, but
Yeah.
I mean, quite convinced. But then the investors say, well, we're going to put in 24 million now, and we're just going to take a fresh start, and we continue basically. And that's mind-boggling to me, that there's so much money in it while you don't need so much money. And so you're basically killing a bit the industry. It's like force feeding something that you cannot actually force feed. Because I know from experience, in freight audit, which is a difficult business, but of course, I mean, you know a lot of people, you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs in the business, and salespeople from different angles, whether that is 3PL or TMS and so on. And nobody said, well, we just doubling or tripling our business every year because there's so much response and everybody wants what we have. And that's not the case. I mean, as you know very well, the market is fragmented. You have long sales cycles, and you name it. So, and then you get all this hoaxy, we are going to disrupt the markets, and I'm very skeptical about that. So it's because I know you cannot disrupt. I've been trying to disrupt it for a very long time and get customers. Being on the sales side, say you need to have freight audit. If you're not checking your bills, you're throwing money away, and you can save millions. And people were not triggered by that, and they had bigger fish to fry. So it's like when you get into the practical, very pragmatic logistics world, it doesn't work like that. And what I see in the venture capital, with that come a lot of people that have never done any steel toe job in the industry or wherever. So they don't know what logistics is about. I mean, try disrupting your bag in a warehouse for a day, and then talk about disrupting logistics. But disrupting logistics is more than building dashboards. It's and throwing a lot of money at that. It's also the main part of the work, which is still heavy, mechanical, involves hands and a lot of different complex things. So it's
a physical world.
It's
a physical world that logistics interacts with. Yeah. I think when I was thinking about our conversation today, I was thinking something in the last couple of years got lost in terms of understanding about the way the venture capital world thinks about what it invests in. And that was that I think it was somewhat known when VC first started getting intrigued by the idea of logistics, which was this is a big swing business, meaning you bet relatively small amounts early on into a company into 10 companies that you think have potentially big outcomes. Going in that 6, 7, 8, 9, potentially 10 are not going to make it or make it to the level that you want, but you just hope that the one or two that do. I think that got lost because there was so much money flowing in, and it started to feel like the money that was being invested was like a private equity firm would be investing, which is totally different, which is private equity doesn't go, oh, I hope one of these three things that I invested in work out. No, they want to be close to 100%, right? And we're now getting back to that reality of, wait a second, a lot of companies have had money invested in them. Not all of them will pan out. And even the founders deep down know that, right? And they also, to a certain extent, took bets by going down that path. So, you know, you've been vocal about this. A few others have been super vocal about the misalignment of the VC model with how logistics works. And you brought up the sales cycles. I think that's probably the biggest area of misalignment, is just how long it takes to convince people to invest into something that's not even that expensive, right? Because most logistics teams don't have a ton of budget to work with, and when they do, they spend it in one cycle, and that may be it that they get for 3, 4, 5 years, right? And if they get it wrong, it may be 6, 7 years before they're allowed to spend again. So I do think investors, the VC investors, are smarter about the nuances of the industry than they were maybe 10 years ago, but they still have a mandate to put that cash to work somewhere, right? And so that's the overarching issue. So let's flip this around. I'm interested, you know, you specifically said at the outset, you've bootstrapped this business. What are the advantages of bootstrapping in this industry? Not just to you, but to the customers as well.
Well, for one, yes, you can be vocal about your own opinions on LinkedIn. Nobody's going to tell you can.
Well, that's a benefit to people like me who enjoy reading this too. So.
and a lot of people, they do have strong opinions about what's happening in the industry, but they just cannot voice it. But what is very important for me, I would say, in being an entrepreneur is being flexible, in having freedom to do what you think is best for the company and take the company somewhere. And I know that in a VC business, you're very restrained, and you have to talk to your board, and you have to talk to all kinds of people and convince them and to report to them and so on. And that just distracts from your business. So I feel that we as a company are very lean. We don't need to hire people because to just fill an office or to have bodies to claim that we have everything covered, all our positions, because we rely on, let's say, doing things smart and in a simple way. So we don't have legal counsels, we don't have marketing people, we don't have an office even, and we don't have, let's say, personal assistants or whatever. And everybody contributes to that one goal, and everybody is really centered around customers. So customer wants something, and we say, okay, how can we do this? And then we just do it. And everybody has a say in that. We have very short communication lines. I mean, I often tell my customers, I said, and how many, if you talk to my competitors, did you speak to the owner of the company? No, they didn't. I said, well, you're speaking to one now. And that's a big difference. Because I can very easily say yes or no, and if they talk to somebody else in my company, we can very quickly come up with an answer as well. And they also know, what direction we are going. So we don't need to have let's say, a chief of culture who defines how our culture should look like, how we should communicate, and everything. So we don't have all this fluff, all these masses of people. So we are very efficient. So we're more efficient than our competition. And our customers see that. So that's why we win business. And we grow every year with more than 40%. So we double every 2 years in business. And we have done so since the beginning. And that's good. That's still not, that would not qualify for venture capital. But we don't need it. And I think that's important, that you rally around the customer, because if the customer is not happy, then we don't get money and we go bust. It's as simple as that. And that's the big difference between venture capital and non-venture capital, that they have a license to fail. They can fail. And whose responsibility it is going to be, nobody knows, because you have 3 co-founders, you have 5 VCs that invested. Beyond that, there are a ton of LPs. So who is responsible for the company eventually? Nobody knows. So in my company, it's really simple. If something goes wrong, if my company goes bust, it's only one person's mistake, and it's mine. So I'm not going to let that happen. But that means that you have less room to move in. So you cannot make so many mistakes. You can make mistakes, but not too many. But that means that every move you make or every hire you make, you need to be very efficient in that. And but that makes yourself very efficient. So you cut out really all the bullshit in your company, and that's very refreshing actually. So you don't have to deal with bureaucracy or things like because this is how you need to entertain people's opinion and so on because yeah, we're all heading for the same goal and very cut to the bone basically. That's something I like.
Very persuasive argument. I look at this like and we've talked about this before. I think I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, right? I think there's multiple ways to build a business, and I think anything in that's in excess is bound to be fail, is bound to or at least worthy of critique. I would say, right? Like anything taken to too far an extreme, and I say that like I was in Miami earlier this week and had a chance to meet a couple seed stage investors who both have background in the industry. They've run forwarding companies. They've run air freight like services that where one of them was actually managing actual airplanes, right? Like not just on a computer, right? So those types of approaches where they have a deep industry understanding, like you were talking about earlier, of how the industry actually works and can actually help founders get off the ground. That's an interesting approach. But what you're talking about, where huge amounts invested, very little understanding of the industry, and just kind of placing bets amongst the portfolio bets, that's a different story, right? So,
Yeah.
Let me flip this a little bit back. When you think about the impact that venture capital has had on the industry, is there anything positive to be taken out of it, like attention, talent, like anything you play off of that's good?
I think, yeah, I would say that in general, companies become slower. So my competition is the more money, the slower they get because of all the bureaucracy and everything. So in that sense, it's good for me.
Sure.
But really, something positive, it's very hard to mention. When you look at talent, I don't think there's such a thing as attracting talent to the industry because logistics is in the basis something very basic, but you need to have seen the basic in order to understand it, and that's the problem for many. They have not seen it. They have never had a, let's say, any cargo job or whatever, and have seen the inside of a warehouse and so on. And I think that that is very important because those are the people that you're going to be selling to, the people that have to deal with logistics and logistics problems from day in, day out. And you can talk about tracking, visibility, and everything and all kinds of fancy stuff. And we're going to put everything together. But what are you going to do to really solve the basic problems? And that I don't really see. So for me, talent is really the people that have built a skill in the industry, that understand certain modes really well, or that understand operations, or that have done pricing or tendering, and that really get to the nitty gritty. And in each of those areas, you can go so deep in logistics because there's so much to it. Um, and so it comes with that, and it comes with network, because I think that is overlooked for many companies. Like, there are many companies in the industry that have enormous amounts of salespeople, but they don't even come from the industry. And what you need to have, you don't need to have many people, but you need to have a handful of people that come from the industry, that have a huge network, and they're gonna be making business by just a phone call or two, because there is a trust relationship in place. And that's something that is really overlooked by the venture capital guys.
I would agree with that. I think that inbuilt network is huge in our industry, and that is not going to go away anytime soon. Yeah, very interesting. That's counter. I mean, I've sort of gone with the assumption that money brings talent to the industry, but you make a good case for why that may not be exactly right. So, couple of questions to just finish off. We could go on for a lot longer, but we unfortunately we got to wrap up soon. Okay, this is a question I've never asked any guest, but I'm going to start asking every guest. And it doesn't have to be about VC. It doesn't have to be about anything that we've talked about today. But I want you have very strong opinions. I think most people in our industry do too. You're just a little bit more at liberty to say them. What's one thing that you're 100% certain about, but you may be wrong about?
And you want that to be logistics related?
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be.
Well, I have strong opinions about the war in Ukraine as well, and I just want to. And the way you put it though is it's like almost hoping. So I'm hoping for the fact that Putin is already dead, or will be dead soon. But I unfortunately I think I will be wrong, and that will be a very good way to end the war, I think, and because it's a tragedy.
Well, I think most people tuning in would back you on that and support that. So that's a good one. Okay. Last question, and this I do ask of every guest. Who's your favorite band or musician? And then you have to tell me why.
That will be Led Zeppelin. And why? For two reasons. First of all, I started listening to them when I was 15, 16, 17, listened a lot to them. And that's the type of music that you can use for, or their music you can use for any type of mood. So they have really upbeat, very powerful songs, but they have also very dark songs, very slow songs that bring you in a completely different headspace. And so whenever you put that up and you have a certain mood, you will strengthen the mood that you have thanks to that music. So it's not that you're going to go completely the other way, but it actually strengthens the dark moods you may have, or the upbeat moods you have, and that's what Led Zeppelin does for me.
You know, a lot of people have had some interesting have said some interesting bands when I asked them that question, and it's good to like open, but like let's face it, Led Zeppelin's probably the best band of all time. So like as usual, that all of us want to say. What, any particular song that's your favorite? I know it's hard. So many.
Yeah, no, I mean the most famous one for me is Whole Lotta Love. That's really, if you put that up hard in the car or whatever, you're already right from the start you're gone. So
I love
that's for the good mood.
I love Nobody's Fault But Mine. That's a great one. Yeah. And since the Thor movies came out, I've been super into the Immigrant song too. So that one always good. So
and for me, probably the second one. The song remains the same.
That's a great one too.
Yeah.
I mean, we could go on for another 10 minutes just naming songs that everyone heard of, but
I'm glad you share it with me.
Yeah, awesome. Pieter, thank you so much. It's been a fantastic. I knew this was going to be a great conversation, and definitely lived up to my lofty expectations. So thank you so much. How can people reach out to you or learn more about Freightender?
Freightender.com.
Yep. Cool. And you're on LinkedIn, obviously. So definitely look at.
Easy to find.
Yeah, very easy to find and connect with. So, Pieter, thanks so much. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
Same to you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yep. Bye. Okay. Pieter's awesome. You know, sometimes people who have strong opinions on LinkedIn, you get them in a live discussion and it gets toned down a little bit, but Pieter is who he is through and through. So glad to catch up. And honestly, the area that he's in is super fascinating to me and continues to be fascinating. So hope you all enjoyed the discussion. Just a couple things, just highlight again the blended pledge. Please, someone sign up for this. We would love someone to be backing this and owning this as a company. And last thing, you thought I was going to forget the dad joke of the week? No way. I got a good one this week. This is from my son. What does a witch use to make sure her hexes work? Spell check. That's pretty good, right? That works for me too, since I rely heavily on spell check since I write for a living. Yeah, I was happy with that one. The quality of the jokes is getting a little bit better as my son gets older. So hopefully that will be reflected in our weekly dad joke. So with that, thank you to everyone who tuned in, especially if this was your first episode. glad you could join us and hope you join us for more. We'll be back in 2 weeks on the 19th with another great episode of Logtechlive. Thank you to my awesome producer, Nicole. Thank you to Sarah and the Let's Talk Supply Chain team. Thank you again to Pieter for a fantastic discussion. But most of all, thank you to everyone who tuned in. And have a great weekend, everyone. I'll see you soon.